So great to be here, Idvan, and see you again. Last time I saw you, you were in Tel Aviv. So a bit about myself before the last war. So I was a content creator. I had a travel blog. I worked with tourism boards around the world on branding of destinations. So I've been to almost 80 countries and, been to all continents, maybe except Antarctica. So that was my life. It was pretty good. And I was born and raised in Israel. And I got to October 7th, and what I've seen is complete shock in a way that our tragedy was perceived on social media. I feel that if people in the Western world, they went to news websites or to legacy media on the first days after October 7th, there was pretty enormous support in Israel. But if you went on social media and you went to outlets where younger crowds hang in, you could see already on October 8th a beginning of a denial of the massacre, blaming Israel on for the massacre. And I think the worst one is that, even if there was a massacre, Israel had it coming. They deserve it because it's a justified resistance. And that made me very, very worried, because if these narratives are going to be more prevalent on social media, on the news, then we're in a big problem. So what I did is to initiate a narrative on social media on October 8th. I wrote a few tweets about it, that we should see Hamas as, like, create a narrative that Hamas is ISIS. I think they're worse, but, because ISIS is something that Americans and people in Europe, in Canada, whatever, they know about it. It scares them because ISIS kidnapped, well, obviously they murdered and kidnapped also Yazidis and Arabs, but they also kidnapped Western citizens and executed them in a very awful way and posted it online, on YouTube, for example. And Hamas, on the first day, they did it as well. Like I don't know if you've seen, I hope you didn't. On Twitter and on TikTok and on Telegram, there were endless videos that Hamas took of Israelis being kidnapped, being slaughtered, being beheaded. I've seen a bad video of a beheaded Israeli. And I thought that if we could talk about something that they are scared of, that they know, that maybe they could relate. And that became viral around the world for quite some time. And reality really helped us in a sense that 4 or 5 days after the attack, or after we started with the narrative, it really took on. The IDF found ISIS flags in one of the kibbutzes, villages. And what I've discovered is that apparently there were about 1,000 Gazans that left Gaza to join ISIS in about 2012, something of that sort. And those of them who survived got back to Gaza and joined Hamas. And they brought with them a lot of knowledge that they acquired during their time in ISIS. So, everything got together and it became a huge thing. And then I decided I'm investing my time only in this and taking advantage of my platform for Israel and for my people. We have kidnapped, brothers and sisters in Gaza. Hamas started this war, and I don't think I'll ever stop until they're all back.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad you chose to talk about this. I see The first thing I noticed about you back then, months ago, when I first encountered you on social media, was that your Twitter profile said used to be travel and nature content creator, but then Hamas equals ISIS massacred my people, bring them back. And you have been very, very vocal and very active ever since. And it is, uh, I appreciate it very much, and I hope that we can make an impact and change things. There is an issue that you brought up about ISIS. The one thing with ISIS is also that ISIS is not popular around the Muslim world, for example.
Sure.
Muslims around the world, the majority of them, most of them, they dislike and they hate ISIS and they condemn ISIS. They see them as abhorrent terrorists who misrepresent them and so on, because ISIS has this strict you are either with us or against us attitude. It's not the same thing with Hamas. Hamas is very, very popular in the Muslim world, despite the fact that
Yeah.
they do quite similar things like punishing and executing and torturing those who don't agree with them, kidnapping people, sending suicide bombers, targeting civilians specifically, encouraging people to go after civilians and kill them wherever they find them, and so on. But because the victims of Hamas are not other Muslims or other non-Muslims, but are just Jews, or mostly Jews, or almost exclusively Jews, unless they kill their own occasionally when
Yeah.
they don't get in line.
Then
People
they
don't
don't
seem to have a
care.
problem. Yeah, people don't seem to have a problem because it's
Yes.
just Jews. Yeah.
Yeah. It should be noted that Hamas do come from the Muslim Brotherhood,
Hmm.
and ISIS, they come, they're a branch of Al-Qaeda.
Hmm.
Uh, so they don't like each other as well, but they're both Sunni, radical, fundamentalist uh, Muslim terror organization with, dreaming about a caliphate and Sharia law around the world. And I think that countries in which the leaders fought the Muslim Brotherhood, the leaders do recognize the danger of Hamas,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's prevalent with the people, but rather with the leaders. Like, I'm sure that the leader of Egypt, Sisi, which hates the Muslim Brotherhood, doesn't like Hamas. It's
Yeah.
it's not a coincidence that he does not open Egypt's border and allow Gazans in. The reason
Precisely.
is that he's very afraid of a strong Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And the second thing is that in the end of the day, Muslims around the world, they like to support Palestine, but they don't really do a lot for Palestinians. So Palestinians around the Arab world don't get really that good of a treatment. If you see them in Lebanon, for example, there some of them for years weren't even treated like humans.
Yeah.
So it's all, or like in Jordan, they had Black September. Queen
Oh yeah.
Rania said that like there's no proof for the October 7th massacre. And like, well, maybe there's no proof for Black September. I don't know. It's like it's funny.
It's a thing too. For so many people around the world who are pro-Palestine, and I know it from the Muslim world,
Yeah.
they what they do is from the distance in their safety, in their warm homes, wherever they are, where nothing is really happening, they cheer for the Palestinians and say, "Yes, keep fighting, you will win this." And meanwhile, they give the Gazans or the Palestinians in general this false hope and the false propaganda that they should continue fighting, and they basically send them to their deaths while
Yeah.
cheering for them, and but they will never actually do anything to take care of them, except say
No.
organize a few fundraisers here and there, maybe, and maybe give a little bit to charity, maybe donate a little bit of their money, and that's all there is. And then let's just watch how those people are dying instead of helping them and talking reason into them and making them build an actual functioning society. And this is and the result of it is precisely this. The result of it is a hateful, delusional population that thinks they're supposed to continue fighting for nothing until they are all dead. And then when that happens, they then blame Israel for it.
Yep. Sounds about right. Exactly.
Um, I want to ask you a few questions to go through it. So, since October 7, there has been a lot of support, and a lot of people are in solidarity. I saw recent polls, even in like the UK, the US, the vast majority of people still support Israel. Although,
In older ages,
yeah,
yes.
although on social media and in the streets, it looks like the pro-Palestine crowds are loud. The reality is just that,
The silent majority is yeah. The
yeah,
silent
yeah,
majority has I don't know how to call it. They have like a basic logic of
yeah,
how the world, like, fuck around and find out and
yeah,
play
yeah.
stupid games, win stupid prizes. We still have that basic logic. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a lot of opposition to Israel. There always has been. Some people are acting like, "Oh yeah, finally the world is waking up to Israel's, evil and all of that." Not really. It's just the same people who always hated Israel are again against Israel and are trying to normalize this whole thing. But there has been so much opposition to Israel since October 7 and so many different new narratives. What is your, how do you feel about this whole trend right now of just not knowing anything about the conflict, but just hating on Israel and trying to stop Israel and whatever it is?
I do agree with you that the same people that went against Israel, spoke against Israel, in the past are still the same people. I still agree that they are a majority. And as I said, they're a minority, and the silent majority is either they don't care, they're indifferent, or they have a sense of support or even an understanding, of facts. They opened this war. Gaza is not occupied. It's not a land in dispute.
Mhm.
There's no excuses to what is going on. But what I see today, maybe for the first time, it's been around for several years, but it's the first time I see that on such a global scale, is the fact that this local dispute, this local conflict between the Jews and the Arabs that has been going on for more than 100 years, and it's not local in a sense that we are proxies. We are proxies of two X's. And maybe I should elaborate. So I think it's more clear than ever that we've seen that the people who contribute the most to American universities and promote Marxist agendas on campus are Russia, China, and Qatar.
Mhm.
Qatar is they are founding Hamas. They're funding Hamas, basically. So these are the biggest donors of in higher education in the US. Second thing is, you can see on TikTok, we now see research that says that it promotes agendas that if people talk about something that is against America, hating on America, wanting America, I don't know, to fall, hating on Israel, hating on Jews, hating the West, hating Western values, going against liberalism, they all get amplified on this platform. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that, even the progressive movement, the whole, intersectionality um, fights, of causes that in the beginning, I thought that they were really right. I am pro women. I am pro, Native Americans. I am pro, Black Lives Matter. I'm pro LGBTQ. LGBTQ. Yeah, I'm pro everything. But then it went and took a turn to a very dark place, in my opinion, that is very, very Marxist, right?
Mhm.
The Marxism and what it's like there's an oppressed and an oppressor. And if you're brown or black, then you can do whatever you want. And if you're white, then you're bad. And like a lot of things that, if you read the Communist Manifest, It's more or less like the thing. And I don't think it just happened. I think there were, somebody brought us to this point. Now, the first people to suffer from that are the Jews.
Hmm.
And I think that when you talk about the trend against Israel, this is the framework that we need. This is, the premise that we need to talk about if we go into this conversation. And I think that the Chinese and the Russians, but mainly the Chinese, but also Iranians are in that they're very smart. It's like making the world, the West fall without even shooting one bullet.
Hmm.
That's how I feel it is. And Israel is just the first domino in Western civilization. And if Israel falls, then it will get to your home too. It's just a matter of time. So there is a local conflict and there is local history between Jews and Arabs, but it's also part of this trend is also part of something, a big shift in Western countries that makes the West fall, collapse from within,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way I see it. And you can see a really good example of that with the fact that Jews are being called, white Europeans, yeah, white colonizers, which is so funny because 80 years ago, Jews were sent to the gas chambers because they weren't European enough.
Hmm.
They weren't Aryan. And now suddenly they're white colonizers. 80 years ago in the US, Jews had quotas in universities because they weren't WASPs, they weren't
Yeah.
white. They
Yeah.
weren't Protestant, they weren't white. And they didn't even have access to some country clubs because they were Jews, and Jews are not European. So 80 years later, suddenly we're the white colonizer. How does that make even sense? So when you came to Israel, what did you see?
I didn't see white colonizers. I saw a very, very diverse population.
Diverse.
Uh,
Yeah.
that does not consist of these bunch of white people who are privileged and all that. That's not at all what I saw.
Yeah, we do have people that could pass as white,
Uh-huh.
but it's not the majority. And if you will look at the Palestinians or Lebanese or other peoples in the Middle East, you can see that this is quite common. Not
Hmm.
all Middle Easterns look, the same, and we are diverse in that sense. So the Jews are as well.
You know what it is? So during the whole mandatory Palestine area in under the British Mandate until 1948, especially toward the end of it, just to go to the historical aspect, the Zionists, the Jews, they weren't part of the white elite. They were. There was
They
a
were
free
fighting.
Palestine movement then, and free Palestine meant free this Jewish land from the British control, put an end to it so that we can finally have our land. And
Did you see the posters from
yes, yes,
1946?
yes.
Yes, of like Jews calling to free Palestine, the original
Yes.
ones.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it wasn't and comparing them to the Arabs back then. So back then, Palestinian meant everyone who lives there. It was like a Palestinian Jews and
It's a
Palestinian
name of a
Arabs.
region,
Yes, yes,
not of a
yes,
people. It's a
yes,
name of a region, but not of a country. There was
yeah,
never a country, a
yes.
state named Palestine, and there were never a people named Palestinians. It's like, I don't know, maybe in Austria you have like Tyrol,
Hmm.
the area of Tyrol. The people who live there are Tyrolean, but it's not an ethnicity.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just the name of the people who live in the region. You could live in the region and be a Tyrolean as well.
That's true. I mean, there is no shared history of a shared, very distinct history of Palestinians that have like that you can trace back for centuries, or
Never.
even 1 century. You can't really trace it back. There is no common language. There
Before
is
the
no common
Balfour
behavior.
Declaration, there is no, like, ask Palestinians, that's something for you at home. When you see a Palestinian or pro-Palestinian, ask them, what is the most important event in the history of the Palestinian people. And they'll probably say the oldest event was Balfour Declaration. But what was before then? If you ask us, the Jews, we have so much history ingrained in this place. We have archaeological artifacts all over this land with, that you can find in old ancient Hebrew. The language that we speak, the language that we prayed with our Bibles for 2,000 years. People in Yemen, in Israel, in Poland, and in Morocco prayed with the same book, with the same language. And there were always Jews. There was always a continuous settlement of Jews in this land. And you can never, there was never a Palestinian currency. There was never a Palestinian flag before 1964. There was never a Palestinian leader, before Yasser Arafat. Maybe some people say Haj Amin al-Husseini, maybe, but you don't have any leader or any history before the 20th century. While Jews, also Jews in what is called today Israel, they have thousands of years of history
That's true.
that is proved and documented.
Yeah, what's funny is when I was in Israel, when I was in Jerusalem specifically, we met with, or I went with Michael Rappaport. He was having his bar mitzvah, and as part of that, we were having a tour with him, and we went through the underground digging sites, the archaeological site under the Western Wall and near the Western Wall and all of that. And we had this tour, and we basically explored how the Israeli government and Jewish organizations try to continue digging and finding more and more Jewish history or ancient history or any history from the region. And they are finding new stuff every single, I don't know, year, month, day. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about this is, I remember watching propaganda videos from Gaza by Hamas on their state TV, Al-Aqsa TV, where they tell people basically to become terrorists. And they were telling children there that the Jews are currently digging under Jerusalem because they want to make the Al-Aqsa mosque collapse and kill Muslims or something like that. And then I go there and I go to the actual digging sites, and what they're doing is just trying to uncover history. It's funny because on the one hand, you have the Jews who are making an effort to uncover the history, and they are doing it. On the other hand, you have Hamas telling people, no, we have to stop. We have to stop them from digging there because they actually want to just destroy Jerusalem. It seems like quite obvious that Hamas is anxious about what's going on there, and they're trying to fool their own people into fighting and stopping the Jews from finding out more and more.
That wouldn't be new, We are already experienced with the lies and indoctrination. Sometimes I get so many things from Arabs, not only Palestinians, but also Arabs from Arab countries or the ones who live in the West, and they're saying so many funny things. And I was like, no, read history. I was like, no, that's what I was taught in school. And you've been indoctrinated. This is a lie. Like, this is so easy to find out. Like, all the things I say, you don't really need a book history for that. You can use Wikipedia. Like, it's not that of a problem. But I have a question for you as an ex-Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about something in Islam called taqiyya,
Mm-hmm.
That like you can lie if it serves your religious war.
Mm.
And like I wonder how prevalent it is and how many of them know that they're lying and they still do that.
I can answer the question. So it is a complicated topic. So there is one thing about the narrative that is correct, which is that lying is allowed and it's common. But there is a misconception about it, which is the naming of it, the taqiyya, because most Muslims don't learn taqiyya as a strategy or as a practice, or don't even exactly know what it refers to. It is more a historical practice, mostly a Shia practice, and also something that is historically and academically, Islamically, academically known. However, um, while the naming of it as taqiyya, which is a very, very common understanding about Islam when looking from the outside, while it may be a little bit mischaracterized, it is indeed true that Islam allows lying and deception in different cases, including in war, in reconciliating, wife and or husband and wives, plural, in some other issue, and in war. And Islam has a very vague definition of what a war is. Anything that goes on is a war. Insulting Islam, criticizing Islam, questioning Islam, trying to replace Islam is war. Going against Muslims and what they want is a war, and so on. So during this war, be it actual warfare or informational warfare, deceiving and lying is allowed if it serves the purpose of serving Islam, basically, which is why it is not forbidden for Muslims to go online and lie to you and deny certain truths and deceive you as long as it serves their purpose and elevates their position from their perspective. And this is an extremely problematic thing.
Yeah, but I also think now, so we have, basic values in Western cultures of, of like basic decency, I would say. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people in the West are shitty people. You know why? Because people are shitty, and there are also shitty people in Western countries. That's not, something to be surprised about, but there is a sense of decency. And I think that there is a group, not a big one, or I don't know what is the size. I can't really, say what is the size of this group that uses this culture of lying as something that you can operate against the West with.
Mhm.
So the West is really being led on because on the one side, they're being very decent and candid, and the other side is taking advantage of it.
Mhm. That is true.
That's
That
how
is true.
I interpret it. Yeah.
That is true. That is what is happening. And so I grew up I grew up as a Muslim in Germany in a Turkish family, in a very religious one. And I mean, I basically learned in the very religious communities and culture this whole attitude of we Muslims, we are supposed to distrust and dislike and basically hate the disbelievers and what they stand for, but we can smile in their faces and get along with them and so on. But we should never ever forget that we may never befriend them, because even the Quran itself says, it clearly says, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are only allies of one another or friends of one another, and whoever befriends them is one of them. So the Quran, it's funny, right now during this conflict, lots of Islamists online are trying to win Christians over for their cause, but they know underneath that the Quran says, and they believe in this, that the Christians are not their friends. The Christians and the Jews are friends of one another according to the Quran, and they're supposed to see them as two hostile entities against the Muslims. But right now they're basically trying to deceptively use Christians. And as
But that's
offensive as this
working
sounds,
really
this is the
good,
reality.
Yeah, it works really well because like I think that Israel comes to this story quite honest,
Hmm.
and I'm not saying we're perfect, but we're quite honest.
Yeah.
And I think that the Israelis have proved, that we just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
We gave territory back for peace. We made endless peace agreements. We tried giving the Palestinians big parts of Judea and Samaria, and they never agreed because, as Abu Mazen, the Mahmoud Abbas is the head of the Palestinian Authority. He comes
Hmm.
from Fatah. He said, I can't agree to the peace offers because that means I need to go and tell millions of Palestinians that they're not going back home. This is the narrative. This is the backbone of Palestinian identity. Now, like, I don't know how to say it even more clearly. They started the war in 1948 after they refused the partition plan by the UN for a Jewish state and an Arab state. And they started a war, and most of them fled. And a small minority of them was kicked out. Yeah, that's true. But the majority of them fled, and they lost.
Yeah.
And, as I said, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. They were the ones that initiated that war. And it should be noted that most cities and villages in Israel were never Palestinian or Arab to begin with. So they're talking about Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was founded in 1909 by 60 Jewish families that bought the land.
Yeah.
They owned it. It was a real estate deal. The big parts of Israel, maybe if you don't know, I've read a number talking about between 80 to 90% of the Israeli territory. I'm not talking about the land in dispute in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, was owned by Jews, or it was Jewish cities before 1948 or after most of it wasn't taken. They fled from cities like Lod, Ramle, Majdal, which is today Ashkelon, Haifa, Nazareth, but that's more or less the thing. So it's really funny that you're not going back anywhere. Most of the places didn't even exist.
Here is the thing that is very true. Much of that is it needs to be pointed out. But here is the issue: when you are dealing with the Palestinians today who identify as Palestinians, the vast majority of them actually really don't know any of this. They don't know because they are being lied to by Hamas, by their Palestinian Authority, they genuinely believe, like lots of them actually genuinely believe that they held all of this land and the Jews were these invaders who came and kicked them all out and took their land. Because back then they had grievances with the fact that that the Jews could just come and buy land and have their land, or they could add to the communities which they already had. Hebron, for example, was a big example of big Jewish presence, which continued until it was kicked out. But there is a common narrative, a common false narrative that people actually believe in, because after being lied to for decades and decades and decades and never knowing about it, they came to accept this as a reality, that the Jews came and took their land and kicked them out. Now, how do you deal with this population that doesn't even understand anything that happened and that just considers themselves the victim, which is why they believe they should be fighting and dying for this land,
killing all the Jews from the river to the sea? And we're all always talking about Hamas, but I don't think it's different with the PLO.
It's not just
Hamas, and we could see that in surveys that were taken before and after October 7th in the West Bank. And the reason that there aren't any elections in the West Bank for the past 17 years is because everybody knows, Mahmoud Abbas knows, that Hamas is going to be elected. So he's not allowing.
There was a poll several years ago which showed that if there were elections today in the West Bank, Fatah would lose immediately and Hamas would take over. Fatah is that unpopular, so they have to rely on bullying and abducting people who are opposition and locking them up, killing them, and basically ruling by force. And they are scared that Hamas will take over. And not because they think Hamas is bad, but just because they want to be the ones who do the stealing and not Hamas.
Exactly. And I think that this ideology, I'm sorry, but this ideology that talks about killing all the people from the river to the sea, all the Jews, and is talking about a one-state solution, right? Or, it's not a two-state solution, it's a final solution, another final solution. That's actually Nazi ideology. And with a Nazi ideology, you fight in the next steps. You use the next steps. First step is to defeat it Second step is to take the Nazi ideology out of the people. The German people didn't stop being Nazis on May 8th, 1945, right? There was the Marshall Plan by the Americans that did a denazification process
Hmm.
on the population. And it took time, but look at the brand of the Germans today. They have a great brand. They are considered really good people. I like Germans so much. And it's not even 80 years that have passed. So that's how I think we should deal with the Palestinians if we ever want a future in this land and we want a life with no wars. As I said, just want to be left alone.
But do you think
Then
it's
I think
possible? So,
only if Arab countries will take over the educational. We need to close UNRWA to begin with. And then I think that only if there will be assistance from like powerful Muslim Sunni countries that are not radical, somewhere in the neighborhood of the UAE, maybe Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, then maybe we could grow another generation that in 15, 20, 25 years would see a mutual life together.
mhm, mhm.
I don't want to be their friend. I don't want to live with them. I just want two separate countries. But as long as they are playing the Nazi ideology, then how many times could we offer a two-state solution and they can refuse one? I need the Palestinians to say, we are the Palestinians, the majority of us. We understand that Israel is a fact, an undisputed fact, and it's here to stay. And we are willing to live next to the Jews, and um, we are stopping with this 100 years of war with Zionism.
But what if
And
I told you, what if I
yeah,
told you, and I may or may not be right about this, but what if I told you that even if that you can't solve the problem by giving land and by giving autonomy and
no, we tried. It
making
doesn't
an
work.
agreement, and that the other side will not just stop fighting even after they agree to a two-state solution, and you re-educate them and so on. What if I said there is simply no way of ever solving this by hoping that we will come to a diplomatic agreement and everything will at some point be fine. These people will just change. What do you think then? What would you think about this? About what I just said, and what do you think should then happen instead?
Do you know who Lord Ernest Bowen was?
Yes.
He,
Remind me.
he, he was a British lord. Yeah, he was a British lord, and he, he served in a committee about the future of mandatory Palestine. And the British didn't know whether they want to stay or not. They want to prolong the mandate. So he said in a committee that as he sees the conflict in the Middle East, this conflict, it is not a conflict that could be solved. It's a dead end.
Hmm.
And he explained it. It was almost, 90 years ago. And, I think it still is today. He says that as he sees it, there are two groups in this land. The Jews. The Jews, the only thing that they want is a home for their people, a land. Like they're living in this land, but they want a country of their own,
Hmm.
a national home. That's all they want. And the other group is Arabs. And all they want is that the Jews won't have a country of their own. And as long as these groups hold to that narrative, those who want something positive, like a country of their own, and the ones who want the other group not to have a country of its own, this conflict could never be solved. And you can see that I really don't believe the Palestinians do want a state, because if they did, they had endless opportunities to get it. they would have a Palestinian state by now. But they don't want it because look at everything they do is against. For example, they even call themselves the resistance, like Harakat al-Mukawama al-Falastiniya. There's always against something, right?
Mhm.
They are always in opposition to something. They're not for anything. They're not for themselves. They're just fighting something.
Mhm.
And what they expect us is to give up. Now, how could I give up? Would the Italians give up on Italy? Would the French give up on France? Would the Japanese? Would the Koreans? No, no, they're indigenous to their land. Why
Yeah.
would I ever do that?
And the problem with here is that the the Palestinian and the pro-Palestinian side argues this false narrative all the time that this is supposed to be their country, all of it, and that any compromise they make, like allowing Israel to exist, would be them giving up their own land. So they will use that
No,
narrative.
that's giving up their identity. Why what you describe is leaves us in a dead end because the identity, the core backbone of the Palestinian people is that we exist, like they don't have any identity that is not united against Israel and this narrative. So, for example, us Israelis, we have so many things going for us. We have like startup nation, and we have like our technological agriculture. We have history and culture that is not related to this conflict. We have a history of 3,300 years. We have a joint language, history, tradition. We have so many things that define our identity as Jews. Even have genetics
Mhm.
that makes us similar to each other genetically. So
You bring
we
up an
have
important
something.
point, which is that in 1919 or early 1920s, there was a thing, the first Palestine Arab Congress, where
Yeah.
the Arabs of the region, Palestine, they agreed on what they want, and one of the first conclusions to them was that this land, which is called Palestine, um, is not a separate land. It is a district of Syria. It is also called Southern Syria, and it has never been a separate entity, and we don't want it to be a separate entity. It should be part of the greater Syria. That is what people said back then. Of course, that is completely forgotten now. But so the identity in that region was we are not separate people. We are not our own people. We are part of
We're
Syria, and we
part of
should
the Arab group.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we should be. It is only after the Zionist movement actually became successful that these people who now define themselves as Palestinians formed an identity, and that identity is, as you pointed out, based on the fact that this conflict exists. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have their own identity. That's true.
So how is it going to end? Because for this conflict to end, a whole nation needs to change its identity. Do you understand?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's no other factors uh in or ingredients in this identity, and this is like the main problem. Like I'm saying, maybe like Palestinians should develop something like a new economy or like something of their own so they could be synonymous with that, because the only thing that holds this identity together is the conflict with Israel. And
Mhm.
I assure you that if Israel ceased to exist, which won't happen, but it will cease to exist, they will fall apart.
Mhm.
They wouldn't stay as a people. They're not leaving as a people as it is now. You have Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah.
The like Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, they were part of Jordan until 1967,
Yeah.
and Gaza was part of Egypt. It's not even like basically the same people.
And the situation was so bad that Egypt didn't want it back, and Jordan didn't want theirs back either.
Obviously,
So,
this was like a big mistake of ours. Like big mistake, huge.
This is indeed, I mean, this is something that people don't know and don't understand, but Israel did actually, on multiple occasions after taking those two regions from Egypt and Jordan, offer officially and unofficially to give Gaza or control of Gaza back to Egypt for
They
peace
didn't want
and
to.
give the West Bank or Judea and Samaria to Jordan, and both sides explicitly outright rejected that. So they
Of course,
never wanted it.
obviously. And yeah, they won the lottery. Like that for as I said, people don't understand, but the Jordanians and the Egyptians want nothing to do with the Palestinians, even though it's funny because about I've seen contradicting numbers, but it's about I've seen number of 50%, some others talk about 70% of Arabs in Jordan are being Palestinians.
Yeah, yeah, it's around. I think it surpassed 50%, and it is now considered that the majority of Jordanians are actually Palestinians or the Palestinian
Yeah,
Arabs.
that
Which
could
is
be Palestine.
yeah, which is and that's how it was actually supposed to be. That was the initial plan way back in around 1920.
Transjordan.
It was
Yeah.
that the land, which is Israel, would be all one Jewish state, and that Transjordan would be the Arab state. So these would be one
Yeah.
Jewish state and one Arab state. It then changed over time, of course, but that was
So,
the
so,
initial
but
plan.
do you understand that if the identity won't change, then the conflict could never end.
Hmm.
And the only way to change identity is education.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
So that is the only resort we have if we want to stop, getting ourselves killed year after year.
Yeah. Um, Now there are different things. I wanted to ask you different questions, like what Israel should be doing right now and possible two-state solution things. We basically just answered all of that. So um, let me go back to
I'm for a
October.
two-state solution. As I said, once they will pass this right of return and acknowledge the fact that there will be a Jewish state. As I said, that requires them to change their identity. So no identity change, no solution.
That's also one of the things. Sometimes when it is brought up that the last two proposals for an independent Palestinian state were rejected, the other side will say, "Oh, because it's unfair, it didn't include the right of return." Well, it's not supposed to include such a right.
No,
You're
that will never
supposed to give
happen.
up on that right. That's not going to happen.
And you know what drives me crazy is the white guilt
Yeah.
of like white liberals talking about, yeah, give the land back. No, you leave America, you leave Canada, you leave Australia or New Zealand or whatever you took and go back to where you came from. I'm not a white colonizer. I'm indigenous to my land. You go back to where you come from. Muslims in Germany and France and the UK and North America are talking about you stole your land. You're not indigenous. You're not indigenous to your land as well. Leave the US. Go back to where you came from. I live where I come from. So don't lecture me about that. This is so hypocritical of them.
Yeah.
I'm dying
Yeah.
of it. I'm living in my home. And so, but the reason is that they won't leave and they know that because nobody expects things, to be overturned. It's obvious that white people are not in the US and North America are not going to go back to Europe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or in Australia. They're here
Not
to
gonna happen.
stay. It's not going to happen. So even if we were to be white Europeans, drop the case. It won't happen. But we're indigenous, so
That's the thing that's a point to bring up indeed, and it is indeed important. There are endless discussions that we can have about whether these claims that they are making are factual or not, whether they are right or not. But here's the thing: let's say for a moment, let's say for the sake of the argument that you are actually right, that Jews are these white people who came over to the region and who settled and who, took the land and who, after a defensive war, actually won and expanded this land. Let's say everything they say is actually true. Okay, well, after this, almost a century after this, 3/4 of a century after this, it's you're not supposed to expect these white people to say, "Oh, you know what? Okay, okay, we accept this. We will just leave all of this land here. You can have it all. Everything we've built now belongs to you. We will just go away and settle in." Oh, wait a minute, where should we settle even? Because we don't even have any ties
Exactly.
to any of these places.
So are the Argentinians expected to leave Argentina and go back to Spain and Italy and other places they came from?
Which they
Most of the
can't. Yeah,
Argentinians are European, are from European descent. They obviously can't, right?
yeah.
And you know, most Israelis don't even have a second passport. That is also a lie. Where will I go back to? Where will I go back to? I'm from nowhere.
Yeah,
I'm in
most
my own
Israelis
home.
today don't have any ties to Europe. Most Israelis today, the those who are alive today, never had any ties to Europe. Don't have second passport. Don't have the chance to go to Europe or anything like that. More than half the population historically doesn't have any tie to Europe. So it's just there are so many misconceptions.
I'm not European.
Okay.
I
Where are you
I'm
from?
Mediterranean. Look at me. I'm not European.
Yeah.
What is that? I don't even look like I'm European. I love it. You know, when like people they comment on my photos like, "Oh, white colonizer." I was like, I'm not, I don't even look like I'm white. What are you talking about? It's crazy, you know? I've lived my whole life in a certain concept of who I am, and then now I'm a white colonizer. I
You know
don't
what
even
that is
pass.
called? This is called you could be considered white passing, but you could also be considered Middle Eastern passing, Mediterranean
Yeah,
passing, anything passing.
I could pass as Italian or
Yeah,
Spanish
yeah,
or Portuguese. I don't know. I
yeah.
could pass as Turkish, I
Yeah,
would
I've seen
say.
lots of, I mean, I would, if I saw you in Turkey, I wouldn't suspect for a second that you are, from somewhere else. You could
Yeah,
totally
I'm
be,
from around the Mediterranean.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
all my genetics, I look like a Mediterranean. It doesn't matter if I'm Israeli or Turkish or Greek or Italian or Spanish. Like it's obvious that I'm from this region, right?
Hmm, hmm.
You know, one time I was in a deli in Manhattan, and I was asking for something, and like the guy told me, "It's like, you're Mediterranean, right?" I was like, "Yeah." How did you know? It's like, no, it's like, I like this kind of beauty. Where are you from? I was like, I'm from Israel. It's like, yeah, I knew you were Mediterranean. Obviously, this is my genealogy. So it's funny that I'm like a white colonizer, a descendant of, I don't know, of European people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is crazy. You know what's one thing that people don't talk about very much? Speaking of white, you brought it up to the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amir
Jamil
Husseini.
Sistani.
Yeah, he was the only leader of the Arab side that was actually widely recognized, who was at some point uh, expelled by the British after being brought into his position to reconcile and make peace with the Husseini family. He was expelled because of his divisive and very outrageous behavior and his revolts. But he spent his time in Italy with Mussolini and in Germany with Hitler and the
Yeah,
Nazis.
there's photos of him with
Yeah.
Hitler,
He worked with the
obviously.
Nazis. He recruited SS soldiers. He preached Nazi stuff to Muslims. He preached Muslim stuff to Nazis, and he made a plan with Hitler also to if Hitler defeats the Soviets and the British, to descend to the Middle East and destroy the Jews under in this area. That was actual. These are actual German foreign ministry state records that you can
And the
find.
Germans, wow, they know how to document stuff, really.
Yes, yes, yes. And he was even after during the war of 1948. He was the leader of the Palestinian side. Afterward, he was recognized as the leader of the Palestinian Arabs by the Arab League and by Egypt. So if you want to look at the history, it is actually that side, the Arab side, that collaborated with the Nazis during World War II and that had a plan of exterminating the Jews. However, right now, it is people are acting like, oh no, these Jews, they are white colonizers and they took over these poor Palestinian people who just wanted to live in peace.
And that's also a false narrative that they're talking about. We don't have problem with the Jews. It's just with the Zionists. Before 1948, we had a good life together. No, we didn't. No, we didn't. You
Yeah,
tried to kill us all the time before 1948.
yeah,
And you massacred us in 1936 and in 1929. God, there was even a massacre in Safat of the Jewish population by Arabs in 1834.
mhm,
Arabs and Jews didn't live peacefully side by side. That's also like an
yeah,
enormous lie. And it's always the Arab side that attacked.
yeah.
You don't
Well,
have like massacre. Yeah. You don't
Jews
have
have a
massacres.
history.
Yeah.
That is known, which is also the plot of one very very popular musical, which everyone should watch right now. Very important, Fiddler on the Roof, which is that Jews have a history of trying to live and trying to develop in a place, and then at some point, under different premises and excuses, being attacked and threatened with extermination and being forced to leave,
Exactly.
going to a different
Yeah.
place, starting all over again, being forced to leave. And this is one of the main reasons why Zionism became a popular idea, to say, okay, you know what? We are done with this. We don't want to be at the mercy of others anymore. We will create our
Let's
own
go back
state.
home.
Yes, yes. And let's be done with
Yeah.
this persecution history once and for all. And
And
now,
and the land wasn't empty of Jews before
yeah,
Zionism.
yeah, yeah, that's true. That is true
There
as well.
were there were settlements here of Jews. There
That is
was
true.
one in Safat, in Tiberias, in Hebron, in Jerusalem. So, as I said, there was a massacre against the Jews in Safat in 1834, many years before Zionism.
Yeah.
So that's also a common mistake that people have regarding the history in the region.
Okay, so a few questions about the current war that is ongoing. The war is one of the most difficult things to talk about right now, because there is an Israel-Hamas war, where Hamas says we can continue this war forever. We have the resources and we will go on forever, and we will attack Israel over and over and over and over again. And obviously, Israel is pretty much united on the idea that we will not accept this or tolerate this anymore. War has to be finished with the destruction of Hamas. However, the scale of this war, because Israel is focused on really destroying Hamas, which embeds itself in the population and acts as civilians as well. There are numbers going around of like 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza and so on.
Yeah.
And they say, how can you accept this? This is so many deaths. This is obviously very, very bad. Ceasefire now. Very briefly, what is your reaction to all that?
First of all, I've seen a demonstration in Times Square with signs of ceasefire now. Do you know when? On October 8th.
Yeah.
On October 8th, the only people that were massacred were the Jews in Israel. On October 8th, there were still hundreds of Hamas terrorists fighting against IDF soldiers, kidnapping people, murdering them. So it took days until this massacre stopped. It wasn't only October 7th. So it was funny to see that the narrative about the ceasefire started on October 8th. And that is something that I wanted to emphasize because that says a lot. They talked about it's like they planned in advance that, 1 hour after the massacre started, we're going to call for a ceasefire because they understand how social media works. There is no importance for facts and truth, which is what we've just talked about for almost an hour. It's about a narrative. So, this is the premise in which I want to start. Secondly, is that I want to remind everybody, even the New York Times and the BBC, which aren't known as Israel lovers, even they say that these numbers are the numbers of the Gaza Health Ministry ran by Hamas. Now, Hamas are people that rape corpses. They're
Hmm.
necrophiles, right? They are pedophiles. They are murderers. They kidnap people. They kill their own people. They let their own people be in great suffer and they don't care. Why would we believe them?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, when you go inside these numbers, the health ministry doesn't even report one Hamas terrorist or what they call a militant dead. It's like all the Hamas fighters are brave and none of them got killed by the Israeli Defense Force. That doesn't make any sense, right? And we know there are about 25 to 30,000 Hamas militants in Gaza. So I'm not, obviously, there are Palestinians, people in Gaza that are, you know, they're not involved and they are in great suffer. They are in great, I'm not denying that,
Mm-hmm.
but they started a war. The numbers are, why would we ever believe these rapists anyway? You know, who would have believed that a person that, you know, murders and rapes and kidnaps would also lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't make any sense that any of the militants died. It's mostly women and children. That also doesn't make any sense. And lastly, a lot of the areas that were bombed, there's no rescue there. Nobody knows what is under the rubble. So how could they even give these numbers? They don't have enough data themselves. Um, so this is without denying the suffer that is in Gaza, and I credit the suffer to Hamas
Mm-hmm.
because that could all be avoided if it wasn't for October 7th. And when people talk about a proportionate response, there was one attempt for genocide in the last 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
and it was against Jews.
Mm-hmm.
There
Yes.
isn't another attempt of genocide. Even when you see numbers and percentages, you see the numbers in Rwanda when they had a genocide, you see with the Holocaust, you see with other places in the world where there was a genocide. We're talking about massive percentage of people being killed systematically. We're talking about between 60% to 40%. The Jews lost about 33% if I'm of the Jews during the Holocaust, if I'm not mistaken. We're not even talking about 1% of the Palestinian population.
Yeah, I made
It
a
doesn't,
graph recently to show the percentage of the global Jewish population that was killed during World War II, and then the percentage of the global Palestinian population that died in this current war, and it's like it is ridiculous to even attempt to compare it.
wow, did you post about it? Like I missed that for some
I
reason.
I
I
posted
should
it
retweet
a
it.
while ago. I should go back and find it. I will send it to you
Yeah,
later.
maybe send it to me later. I want to retweet it. It's really important because people, yeah, so I'm not denying that there's a war. It's a war. It's a harsh war. I think they shouldn't have opened this war. And it's not only Hamas. Don't forget that the first wave that infiltrated Israel was Hamas.
Hmm.
But the second and third waves were of Gazan residents, Gazan population that went into the villages and cities and looted and even kidnapped some of the
This is
people.
This is a very important point. When first the details came out about the massacres and the brutalities that took place on October 7, including them attacking partygoers and killing people at a random festival, which has nothing to do with a military target. One of the Hamas speakers, I think it was Ghazi Hamad, he said, okay, well, something happened, something went wrong, and this wasn't part of the plan, but it wasn't our commanders, it wasn't our operation that did this.
It was the
So
people of Gaza,
they
right?
went first. It was the people who then came after them were the ones who caused this. So first off, that's a lie because we see on footage that there are
They
Hamas
posted videos.
Hamas leaders doing these things. But secondly, what this guy is saying, and by the way, this is also confirmed now by the UN envoy recently that came out with the sexual violence on October 7th report. They said there were three waves. First were the Hamas commanders, then Hamas leaders and other groups, and then civilians and others. And these waves did these attacks, and it is hard to say that all of this was Hamas. So according to Hamas itself, and even according to the UN envoy, it was not just Hamas. It was Hamas and other organizations and Gazan civilians who participated in the
Civilians.
killing,
So to
massacre,
say it's
raping,
like
and so on.
it's just Hamas brought it upon Gaza, that's telling half the truth.
Yeah.
The Palestinian citizens that are not involved with Hamas infiltrated Israeli borders, and looted and kidnapped people themselves. That should be noted. The second thing that should be noted, that they themselves posted videos and tweets celebrating, giving away candy and, celebrating around the streets for October 7th. Didn't they know what is going to come? That they just opened a war?
Yeah.
They fucked around and found out.
That's true.
And that's what kills me. That, people around the world, I was like, oh, poor Palestinians. What? They chose it. We could have been neighbors. We could have lived next to each other. We could have had a mutual life with commerce and everything. They decided not to. We have case studies of making peace, of giving land and making peace. We have so much, there is a vast majority of Israelis that would agree to a two-state solution if they would know that they would be safe, and the Palestinians quit with the bullshit of return. Well, that will never happen. And you don't see that on the other side.
Yeah.
The vast majority of Palestinians are not on that side as well. So the second thing that really kills me with the numbers, so they're talking about proportionate response. First of all, that was an attempt of genocide. Second of all, we have kidnapped hostages. They could release the hostages and make it go away. I ask people all the time, if you support the Palestinians, why aren't you calling for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages? Because they know that they won't tell that, because they don't really think that they're not treating them as human beings. Israelis, they don't really care. So Hamas and the Palestinians made a grave mistake, but now they can't take responsibility. They can release the hostages and make all that go away. They're not even willing to. And a lot of people in the West know that, and they don't call the release of the hostages. By the way, I wanted to say that some of the released hostages reported women entering their homes, not women that were Hamas terrorists, civilians.
Yeah.
Women that went into their homes and took clothes and took food and took all kinds of things. If you see videos, I don't know if you know the user I'm Shin.
Yeah.
She shows luxurious lives. They weren't starving before that. They aren't really starving now. If they're throwing away in humanitarian aid. I'm saying beggars can't be choosers, so that's raises a lot of questions. But they had a good life. Why? Why would they ever do that?
Because of ideology. Just
Exactly.
because of ideology. Because the identity revolves around fighting the Jews and taking all of this land and making it ours. There's something very briefly that I think that I want to highlight, which is quite dark, to be honest. But so when we talk about people dying and civilians dying, here is an issue. Lots of the people who are bringing up the death counts, the casualties, and who say so many thousands of people died in Gaza, are the same people often who will say that on October 7, what happened during this resistance was justified. Lots of these people would say, so let's say you as an Israeli, as a regular Israeli civilian, were killed during one of these resistance attacks and were directly targeted and killed in the most brutal ways, they would justify it and say that you deserved it because you are on their land and you are a collaborator and this and that. However, if there is a war ongoing and there are civilian casualties, like in every war, they will say, how dare you? This is a genocide.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not on their land. I'm on my land. On some parts of my family, we can count more than 14 generations in this land, and that's only what we can count.
Mm-hmm.
So just to clear some facts, the second thing is that this is because they control the narrative. And because they connected themselves with this Marxist ideology of the oppressed versus the oppressor, then they dehumanized us. So that makes me just a colonizer that died and them victims.
Yeah.
And I always think to myself, in the West, people that support them, I don't understand. So you actually are white colonizers, the original ones
Mm-hmm.
that live in Canada or the US or whatever. And if Native Americans, God forbid, would rape and kill and massacre white Americans because they're colonizers and they live on stolen land, would that be justified?
Apparently.
I don't think so. And I want to ask another question. Jews that have been in death camps and survived, and their grandchildren going back to Germany to kill and rape and massacre and kidnap Germans, would that be justified? I don't think so. Why do we, it's the soft bigotry of low expectations that we have from Palestinians.
Yeah.
That they can do whatever they want. This is the progress, all the progressive movement, it allows it to happen. No, of course not. You can't rape and murder people because they're white.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't revenge, and I'm not even talking about the Nazis. If there's something similar to Nazi ideology in this conflict, it's with the Palestinians. But so they leave aside the fact that we're indigenous to our own land. Leave aside the fact that they could have had peace agreements. Leave aside the fact that it wasn't a relationship, like with slaves, God forbid, in the US. It's not even the same. How could you support a rape and murder as a tool of resistance?
It is disgusting. Well, Ella, thank you so much. I hope for the best. I hope that there is peace sometime in the future. It does look a little bit grim right now, but even when so many people who are trying to be loud are against Israel and are drawing a false narrative, I think it is right now an obligation to support Israel, to stand with Israel, and to recognize that Israel is indeed fighting for its own survival, for its right to exist, for the Jewish people, for the Jewish people's right to exist. And Israel needs to continue and finish this mission to make sure that atrocities like these never, ever happen again. And I wish you all, your whole nation and your people, all the best in that they will succeed, because I was in Israel. I saw how Israel is. I saw how Israelis are. And I was also on the other side in a way. And I would like for Israelis and for Israel to bring the solution and to bring peace, because Israel can actually do it. The other side, not so much. I wish you all the best.
Thank you
And
for everything. Thank you for everything you're doing.
anything else you want to add?
I want all my brothers and sisters that are now kidnapped in Gaza, all 134 of them, I want them back And that's what we're waiting for, and that's what we're fighting for. We won't live next to monsters, and we will leave safely, and we want all our people back.
Bring them home. I have this. I have it right here. Bring them home now.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
much, Ella. It was a great pleasure, and I hope I have you back here again. Thanks everyone for watching, and have a fantastic day. And I hope we'll see a solution soon. Until next time.